Hi, welcome to our presentation today, our sort of slideshow and more of a webinar and podcast style for picking up the pieces, encouraging and measuring bicycle use in a changing landscape. So happy you all could join us today. And we got a really great panel of experts that I'm excited to share their stories and help us learn more about this important subject as we try to get more and more people excited about the transportation choices they make and still inspire them and find different ways to encourage more and more people to do it. My name is Lou Feinberg. I'm actually Dero's National Advocacy Accounts Manager, and I've been at the job for over almost 10 years now. Prior to that, I started in bike advocacy with Bike Pittsburgh for more than a dozen years. And this is one of the things I worked on a lot, was trying to find ways and a great time to provide an intervention to encourage more people to try biking to work. And there's really only a few times that really golden times that you can do that. And often when someone is new to the job is a great time to reach out to them. Also, when the location of the job changes, anything that might be a moment where someone has to reevaluate how they're commuting. Those were some of the most vital times to be able to do that. And of course, when gas prices go up, that was another one. And so during the rest of the year, what are some of the other things that happened? And we're going to talk about that today. And one example will be the ZAP system and how, in this case, universities have used that to both do outreach to their staff and to the student body in general, how to encourage people to ride to campus and essentially work as well. And we'll explore that. And so without any further ado, let's get started and find out how things have happened. We'll start with Amelia Neptune from the League of American Bicyclists. And Amelia's been with the League for since 2013. And she runs their Bike Friendly America program. She worked as a bicycling campus coordinator at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, which is a silver level BFU, and she credits the League's 2011 BFU feedback report for her career transition from campus sustainability specialist to campus bicycle coordinator at the U of I. She lives car-free in DC, and when she's not working to create a more bicycle-friendly America for everyone, she's often on her bike with her two young daughters and their family e-cargo bike. So, well, Amelia, tell us a little bit about what kind of work you're doing and what brought you to curiosity about programs like this.
Thanks so much, Lou. And Jerry, you can put it on the next slide, please. So yeah, like Lou said, I've been at the League for a little over 9 years. And if you're not familiar with the League, we're really excited to co-host this webinar because it's an important part of building the movement for safer streets and for a bicycle-friendly America for everyone. We are a national advocacy organization advocating for bicyclists all across the country. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the range of programs that we do this through. So we run the Smart Cycling Education Program, which trains and certifies people to teach bike safety in their communities, to children, to adults, to bicyclists, to drivers. We also put on the National Bike Summit to bring local advocates from all across the country together once a year to network with each other, but also to lobby Congress to influence things like the federal transportation funding and transportation bills, and how that sort of trickles down and translates into things like real bike lanes in your communities. And we have a number of programs and resources and reports that we do to support local advocates around the country. And if you go to the next slide, the key one that I run is the Bicycle Friendly America program. And I'll talk just a little bit about this program and why we wanted to be a part of today's discussion, because we evaluate communities, businesses, and universities on an opt-in basis, meaning they have to come to us and apply to be evaluated, and we evaluate them, give them recognition if they're doing great things, and give them feedback on how they could be even better, regardless of where they are in the process. And then the state program, we rank all 50 states every couple of years, whether or not they want to be evaluated. And if you look at the next slide, just to give you a sense of the scale of these programs, We've got, as of yesterday, we just announced 501 communities are certified through the Bicycle Friendly Community Program, 221 bicycle friendly universities, and over 1,500 businesses in this program. And so it's all over the country, we see institutions, organizations, agencies of all shapes and sizes getting really creative about how to encourage people to ride a bike on a regular basis, whether that's commuting to work, commuting to school, getting around the neighborhood, going to the library, the grocery store, the doctor's office, what have you. That's what we want to see, and that's what we want to encourage. And one more slide from me, if you go on to the next slide. I'll say that we evaluate all of these entities on the criteria that we call the 5 E's. And today's webinar is really exciting for me because I've seen the ZAP program be used by institutions like the University of Minnesota, both as an encouragement tool and an evaluation and planning tool. And I love that. I think anywhere where you can find one tool that does a lot of different things for you, that's really exciting. And we've seen big corporate campuses use it. We've seen city type employers use it, and we've seen a lot of colleges and universities use it. So I've been encouraging Dero to host a webinar like this where we can discuss with some of the people who have been using it successfully to talk about how it's such a great encouragement and evaluation tool, both at the same time. And I put in this slide just to put a plug in that if you use something like this, it gets you points across a lot of different categories in the BFA awards criteria. And so if nothing else, if you need some motivation to look into programs like this, consider that some motivation. But I think the stories you'll hear today from Sarah and John Mark and Steve will really help you understand how tools like this can be so useful for larger employers and campuses of all shapes and sizes. So I'll pass it back over, I think, to Steve next to talk about what exactly is this tool that was the inspiration for today's webinar.
Thanks, Amelia. My name is Steve Sanders. I am the former alternative transportation manager at the university. I was there at the university for like 35 years, and I retired 2 years ago. And now I work part-time for Dero in higher ed business development. And I'm just going to give you a little background about ZAP and how it got started and why it got started. And the reason it got started, I mean, it really started in the kind of the early 2000s when a lot of universities and businesses were starting wellness programs. And I would get consistent questions from people who commuted by bike about why that activity wasn't being rewarded by wellness programs. And, I don't go to the gym, I don't do this, I don't do that, but I ride my bike to work and I'm getting my exercise that way. And why can't I get rewarded that way? So, and the wellness program was also getting those sorts of questions. But I would, annually go to them and say, well, what can we do about this? What are we going to do about it? And for them, I think, and for any potential awarder of incentives, if it's going to be any kind of a meaningful incentive, they want to have some way that you can verify that the activity that they're rewarding is actually taking place. So they want something that's not easy to cheat, and that they can be relatively assured that the people doing the activity are being properly rewarded, and they're not just handing out rewards willy-nilly to people who aren't doing it. So that was always the problem, and there was no good way to do that. And so, and I would go with some, lame-brained ideas to wellness and say, well, what if we have people take pictures of themselves, by their bike and, upload those? And it sounds as stupid now as it did then. And, it just wasn't going to work. And the other thing that you have to do when you're verifying these trips, there's a fine line between, setting the bar at ease of use for the person doing the activity. You don't want to make it so difficult that it's too much hassle. You're just not going to do it and you're just going to give up. But you have to do it high enough so it's not super easy to cheat. So you can't just go online and click a button and cheat and get the reward. So, those are the sorts of challenges we were looking at. And I was continually looking out for things. And I came across in Colorado this dad. He was a mechanical engineer, and at his children's elementary school, his kids bike to school, and he wanted the school to be able to reward them for biking. So he came up with using RFID. And RFID is radio frequency identification, and it's a system that's been around for a long time. It's used for a lot of different things, a lot of counting and tracking, and it, up until then it hadn't been used for counting bike trips. And it sounded intriguing to me, and it sounded like it could work. So I approached Dero. Dero was a local company. They were just down the road from us, and they were interested in it. So we kind of set off on this quest to develop the system. And over a couple of years, we refined it and had a bunch of different ways of transmitting the data. But at its base, there's a reader, it's powered, and it can be either solar powered or hardwired, and a small tag goes on the front spokes of a bicycle. And when you ride past one of the readers, the reader records the ride, and you'll hear a little beep, and it sends the information to a database, and you've got your trip has been verified. And it has a lot of advantages. It really just kind of, RFID technology, like I said, it's been around for a long time. It just works, and it's unobtrusive. It doesn't track you, unlike other like Strava-based systems, GPS-based systems, which track you from the moment you leave your house to your destination and all the stops you've tripped and all the route you've made in between. All this does, it just verifies that you rode past a reader at such and such a time. So it doesn't know. We know what your destination, and when you register for the program, we know where your origination, your trip origination is, because you enter your home address, and we put the endpoint is the campus, so we know the length of the trip, and that's all it tracks. And so there's the privacy issue that is, you can kind of get around it. Some people don't even like that much tracking, but most people are comfortable with that. And a lot of people, because the reader beeps when they go by, a lot of people say, I don't care if I ever get a nickel out of this. I just want to hear that beep. And then we've had a few people say, I'm turning my tag in, I can't take the beep anymore. But the people who wanted to hear the beep far outnumbered the people who couldn't stand hearing the beep. So that's kind of how it got started. And then, so we went back to wellness, and wellness, after we had developed this, and in 2009, we received a grant, a federal transportation grant, and we were able to deploy the system across the Twin Cities campus. We had 20 readers. They were all, at that time, they were all solar powered readers. And we went back to wellness and said, hey, look, we've got this is how it works. It's deployed across campus. What do you think? And they said, yes, we will. This is good. And so they started rewarding. You could earn wellness points, and the wellness points, what they did was they translated into reductions on health premiums. So the university was self-insured, so you paid premiums to the university, and you could earn points that would reduce those premiums. And it started out, it was about, in the very beginning, I think it was about $20 a month if you rode, I think it was 50 times a year when we very first started out. And this was back in like 2010, I think, is when our first year. And John Mark can talk about this later, but it's up to, I think you can earn like $1,000 a year now, reductions on your health insurance premium. So it's really a meaningful reduction. And the other part of this is the kind of the some of the follow-on is we're collecting a lot of data, because you have the data points for each ride. You know the time of day. You know the person's affiliation with the university, whether student, staff, or faculty. You know their gender. You know their age. you know, how far their commute is. So you're gathering some meaningful data that you can use in a lot of interesting ways, and we can talk about that can be talked about later. But the system is, and it's really just reliable, and you don't have to do much with it. In a northern climate like ours, it's a little more difficult during the winter just because of the angle of the sun and the temperature. But most of the time it's just it's pretty foolproof. And so that's how it got started. That's how it works. And pass it on to the next person.
It'll be John Mark. Take it away. Tell us a little bit about University of Minnesota and your work there and how the program's advanced.
Hi. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for giving the history, Steve. So like Steve said, you know, the ZAP program is one of our key biking programs in the university, because it provides ridership data, you know, that we use for incentive and rewards. And I think one key item there also, like he was saying, is that it's, you know, it's quite transparent. You know, the users could go into it and look at their own information. And so, you know, data is collected at a cordon and corridor level. So at a corridor level also, we could look at how we would prioritize work around the university for biking infrastructure. You know, without going too deep into the user data, we could identify where people are coming from. And so where we have issues, we could, you know, find the ones that would benefit the most people. Like you said, students get rewarded with monthly prize draws. And it builds a sense of community. One of the things that we do is we have the challenges that, you know, people form groups, and using the data from the readers, we award prizes to the top teams. So we have, you know, different group sizes that they compete. We have one in spring, one during the summer session, and one during the fall session. And like Steve said, you know, incentive, it's a good way of offering incentive that people see, and it's transparent to them how they earn it and how they get rewarded. And like he said, the wellness benefits, it's something that's key for us. Is, you know, we have good working relationship with our wellness program, and you could get $750, not $1,000. $750 off of your insurance premium, and you could earn all those points purely from riding your bike every day, you know, well beyond what is required for that. So that's how, you know, that's how we work the program, you know, over at the U.
Thanks, John Mark. Let's learn from Sarah Bronstein at Oregon State University and some of the work that she's been doing there and using the program successfully. Sarah, please introduce yourself and also talk to us a little bit about your program.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. So I am the Sustainable Transportation Manager at Oregon State University. Our campus is in Corvallis, Oregon. That's the location of the primary Oregon State University campus. We do also have satellite locations throughout the state, but our ZAP program is primarily focused on commuters and students in our Corvallis location. Our campus has about 24,000 students and about 6,000 employees. And we launched our ZAP program in 2018. We launched it on Earth Day. There's a picture of our launch party to the left. And not all those people were just there for us. We found that one of our more successful tactics is to piggyback off of other existing events. So we held our launch during an Earth Day fair, which is historically very well attended. And within a week of launching the program, we had about 100 riders with ZAP tags. So we were putting a lot of tags on bikes and getting people excited about the program. And because it was in April, it was right before Bike Month. And so we were able to continue building momentum through the rest of the school year by getting people excited about riding during National Bike Month in May. And the way we run our program is a little bit different than John Mark's program. So we do not incorporate it into a wellness program. Instead, we do more of a traditional individual incentive and team incentive style. So every month, riders who ride at least 10 times that month and collect 10 zaps are automatically entered into a prize drawing. And those prizes are generally either some item of bike gear, like a set of lights or clip-on fenders or waterproof helmet covers, or it's a gift certificate to a local business. And then we also run seasonal team challenges where people can participate in teams between 4 and 10 riders. And the challenge goes for a month, and the team that collects the most zaps during the course of that month wins things. So we've had, historically high ridership in the program. We built up our momentum during the first 2 years that we were running it. And then we've had to be nimble and think about things a little bit differently. During COVID, ZAP definitely didn't look the same for a while, and we can talk a little bit about that, how we've had to modify our programs during that time. And then in the time since then, as we've come back to in-person operations on campus, we've sort of had to do a reboot and get people excited all over again about the program. But the things that people loved about it in the beginning are still the things that people love about it today. On the right is a photo of one of our teams. That was a team from the Linus Pauling Institute, so biomedical research. They're out there in their lab coats with their bikes. And people are, they're not motivated by me or by a prize generally, they're motivated by each other. And so we've really found the social norming aspects of the ZAP program and the ways in which we can use it to daylight all of the different riders on campus who might have felt alone before has been really powerful.
Hey, thanks, Sarah and Jean-Marc. Good stories to learn from. Why don't we start right away with a question we received online from Flagstaff, Arizona, and it's about the tension that's sort of come up in recent years. Forever bicyclists, of course, have always looked to find safe routes to wherever they're riding, and often commuting rates rise as we find cities with more and more separated facilities, bike paths, and such. This question concerns the tension with all the electrified multimodal forms of transportation, scooters, skateboards, and of course bicycles, and the hazards that they present in some of these areas that were once protected, but now there's all this electrification, and frankly, that makes some people uncomfortable. Have you had to deal with that much, and how have you dealt with it?
Okay, I'm gonna go first on that one. So we do have electric scooter and bike share programs in our campus. And this year, you'd be surprised, we had 5 different vendors. So, we had, close to 500, around 500 scooters going around the campus. Admittedly, it's a fairly large campus, with over 55,000 students. But it's getting to be more mature in terms of usage, education. So one of the key things that we stressed was really riding safety, riding in sidewalks, parking properly, and the technology with the scooters and how they monitor performance also, and sending messages is a bit more mature now. So you have end of ride photos, you get geofencing where you try to control them. And honestly, we didn't have as much problems as we've had in the pilot sessions from the previous years. So, knock on wood, it was not really an issue for us. If there's a lingering issue, it's probably more towards just addressing just the speed, because with the electric assist, you're able to accelerate a lot quicker. So what we used to think as short segments of footpaths, we need to be a bit more mindful on how quickly people accelerate. But like I said, we had 5 scooter vendors. We had 1 bike share vendor integrated to our rewards program. But, we were quite happy with the safety records that we had this year.
So Corvallis doesn't have a shared electric micromobility system, but we do have a school of engineering with a lot of nerds who love to try new toys. And so we certainly have seen a lot of all types of privately owned electric scooters, hoverboards, one wheels, you name it, around our campus. And I will say that we have not, at least from the data that has been shared with me, observed an increase in incidents or related specifically to electric vehicles. So I will start to get worried if I see the data showing that more people are getting injured proportionately on those devices. But so far, I think John Mark is right that there's been a learning curve. People have had to kind of get used to the feel of what it feels like to be passed by someone that has a electric assist. And those folks on electric assist have to kind of get used to what it means to share the road with traffic, both slower and faster traffic. But so far, I think we're all coexisting peacefully.
Oh, and sorry, Lou, baby, I just also want to point out that one thing we did have to do as part of the preparation was that, we had to modify our traffic ordinance to have specific clauses, right, on e-bikes and e-scooters. And we're still to do that with, figuring out e-skateboards, but like Sarah said, there's no end in this innovation.
Yeah, very true. I don't know if Amelia or Steve, you had any, Steve Sanders had anything to add to this.
Well, it's gotten a lot better because in the beginning, when it first came out, it was crazy, especially with the scooters. But once they introduced like Lock 2 requirements, because that's what they did at the university, it became, because there was a real issue with the disability community. Scooters were getting left on sidewalks and blocking curb cuts, and just people were just dumping them everywhere. And so that's helped a huge amount. And that happened before I left. And so that made a big deal. But people are pretty compliant. I mean, they don't ride on sidewalks a lot. They're in the bike lanes, and there hasn't been didn't get a lot of feedback from bike riders complaining about scooters in the bike lanes, because they go as fast as a bike does. So yeah, it's gotten a lot better. And they absolutely killed bike share, though. I mean, the orders of magnitude more rides on scooters than bike share.
Yeah. There's a follow-up question actually that's come in as well regarding the tax incentive, the federal tax incentive, for employees, that the IRS enacted in the tax code. This person that's writing this question mentions that they're a federal employee, and so they really haven't had much problem at all instituting that at their workplace or being part of that program. It's worked out very well for them. But nearly, not many other people in their community really knows about this program. It seems to be very underutilized. I believe they learned about it from the League. What's the status with that? How is that contributing to getting more people on bikes and possibly participating in programs like this? Maybe Amelia's
so
good.
A little bit of, I can jump in with this one, and it's kind of a sad story right now because the federal tax incentive actually no longer exists as of the 2018 tax bill. It was the bike component was removed. A lot of employers kept doing it at their own expense, which was great that they found that important enough to continue to incentivize bike commuters, but it's no longer recognized by the IRS. I will say that's something the League has been working steadily on since then to try to get it back in, and even to make it stronger, because things like bike share accounts, the costs associated with having a bike share account couldn't be counted. It was only being reimbursed for personally owned bikes and maintenance and tools and parts associated with your own bike. So we've been trying to get it back in. We've been trying to get it to a higher dollar amount for better parity with transit and car parking related tax incentives that exist, and then trying to expand what people could potentially spend their money on. So that's the unfortunate answer right now, is a lot of people don't know about it because it has sort of been dormant for several years. But that's one of the things that our lobbying team is always working on, trying to figure out how to get it back. And we welcome, league members writing in to their members of Congress and getting involved with the National Bike Summit and Lobby Day to advocate for changes like that that would make it easier for employers to incentivize bike commuting. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, and we encourage everyone who's attending to please send us questions. We'll be happy to have the panel answer them. And I know the panelists also have some questions for each other, and we have some things that we'd like to discuss in more detail, but your questions will take priority. Emilia, why don't we start? I know you had a question that you wanted to present to the folks on the panel, and so why don't we start with that one?
Sure. Yeah, so this is a question mostly for Steve, but John Mark, if you have more recent info to share on this topic, feel free to jump in. But from my work on the BFA program, I've been able to watch the University of Minnesota use ZAP sort of in tandem with the city of Minneapolis, with 3M, which is headquartered in the area, and Target, which is headquartered in the area. And all four of those employers in the three employers in the campus used ZAP to have a competition community-wide to see which institution could have the highest ridership. And I loved watching this from afar. So I wanted to see if Steve or John Mark could share a little bit more about how that went with the different sort of institutions and employers coordinating, and like, was it hard to convince anyone to join or to adopt the ZAP program? Were they all already using it? How did that come about, and is it still going on?
Well, I'll start by just getting out of the way that the university killed everybody, and we handicapped ourselves terribly, and we got like 1/12 of the points because we had, we were just so far ahead of everybody. So I just want to get that out of the way. But it started, I just thought it would be fun because Target had a program, 3M had a program. And my son was actually like the president of the Target Bike Club. He worked for Target. So I was always needling him about that we should get a competition going. And I knew the person at 3M too, who had the program there. And so we decided we'd have a competition to see a commuter challenge, business and commuter challenge. And so we did. We had a challenge, and it coincided with like National Bike Month, I think. I can't remember the exact dates of it, but we had this competition, and you would earn points. Each ride would earn points, and we handicapped it based on the number of people in the program. So the university had way more than anybody else did. So we figured out a way to balance that, so we wouldn't kill them, and we still killed them. So we should have figured out a better way. But it was a lot of fun. And then what we did was we had a bike rack then made for us by Dero with a winner on it, and whoever won was going to get the bike rack installed at their place of business. So we had it at the university, and it was just a 1 year. Target, a lot of the business, especially the national businesses, they're a little hesitant to reward employees when they can't reward employees everywhere at all their locations with the same thing. So there's some difficulty there, and kind of the same thing with 3M. Their main campuses, both Target and 3M's main campuses are here, but they of course have thousands of employees all over the country and all over the world. So it's a little more difficult for them to institute this thing just they have fairness issues that they're thinking about, and rewarding employees and not being able to reward other employees that's not available to them. So it was just kind of a fun thing. We always wanted to be, and I know Amelia will remember, the National Bike Challenge. We should be able to count. We should count Zep rides in the National Bike Challenge, and I would email, kind of constantly pester them about that. But that was a corporate sponsored challenge, and so there's lots of ways you could, that you could do this, and with anybody who has a ZAP program, it's easy enough to have a challenge. We had a challenge with a hospital in the Netherlands, and they actually killed us because like every single person rides a bike to work, and so there's anybody who has a ZAP unit on their place of business or on their campus can challenge anybody in the world that has ZAP and have a fun kind of challenge.
Thanks, Steve. Good story.
That's great.
There's a question now about what's the cost like to start up a program like this, the installation, the materials. Sarah, remind me how long ago you started your program, and what was your cost involved in that and supporting it?
Yeah, the cost is not insignificant. And so you have to be prepared to think about how much you're willing to invest in a bicycling program. And depending on the scale of your budget, the numbers I spit out may sound either very reasonable to you or astronomically huge compared to some people I know who have a budget of nothing, except for their time and a little bit of like poster printing costs. So, we purchased the units in 2016, and then, and I believe at that time the cost per unit was like $4,000 for a hardwired and $6,000 for a solar paneled unit. I might not have that quite right, and Steve probably knows those answers better than I do, but I don't know how that compares to today's dollars. And then there is the cost of the installation, which, if state entities, we can take any budget and, at least double it by the time a project is done. So we have 11 units around our campus. We had to install footings for a lot of those units because they were resting on poles rather than being attached to buildings, just because of the nature of the locations we chose. And oftentimes those were solar units, which meant they required a larger footing with rebar reinforced concrete about 6 feet down. Doing all of that work ended up costing us about $50,000. So that was our ballpark to sort of get into the game. But once we did that work, the system, as Steve mentioned earlier and John Mark has alluded to, it kind of requires very little maintenance on an ongoing level. So the RFID stations are just ticking along, and every once in a while we found that we have a particularly wet climate, and those highly motivational beepers inside the units sometimes start to sound a little sad, and we have to go and replace them because they just get a little bit too wet, I think. But other than that, yeah, our costs are mostly associated with incentives and staff time, which is adjustable, scalable to whatever your program needs are.
John Mark, is that consistent with your experience?
Yeah, it's correct. Like Sarah said, there's the initial upfront cost, but the equipment really is simple enough. It ages well. We've had ours over 10 years, and the major works that we've had to do is not with the equipment, but because of telecommunication. We had to switch off from 3G to 4G and switch off all the modems. But it's not necessarily how the machine itself works, but the hopefully we're not going to go to 5G anytime soon that we need to do that. But, you know, if they're going to phase out 4G, then we have to do it again.
And I would encourage people to look into some of the provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act. And there is money available and grant funding. The initial funding for the University of Minnesota system was through federal transportation funding. We got $100,000 to be able to buy 20 stations. And I would encourage people to really investigate that, because I think there is money going to be available. This is infrastructure, and it's also program. And I think if people put together smart applications, that they can get funding for a system. And the other thing that you need to think about is, you don't need a reader on every corner. Think about corridors. Think about where people are biking. Think about entry points into your campus or your business, and you put them there, and so they don't have to be. And people will go out of their way a little bit. You know, they'll ride a block or two out of their way to go past a reader if you're offering an incentive, or even if they just want to keep track for their own, their own personal satisfaction. But I would really encourage people who are interested to check out grant opportunities, because I think there are grant opportunities now, and there for the next few years. I think there's going to be even more opportunity.
Okay,
Yeah, I
thanks,
don't know.
Steve.
I just sent a chat to our organizer. I don't know if she can share links with attendees, but I just put a link in the chat, hoping she can share it with everyone, to a USDOT document. I'll put it for panelists to see, that just lists out all the different federal funding opportunities that exist right now. Thank you, Sarah. And there are a ton, like Steve said, there's a lot of money available right now, which is so exciting. And not just for infrastructure, but for programming. So encourage any entity who's up for applying for grants to take a close look at this. I know it's kind of a daunting document, but yeah, I recommend digging into it if you're looking for funding for your infrastructure or programming. And that I'm going to jump to the next question, Lou, if that's okay. There's a great one. If a school or a company doesn't have any financial incentives available to give out to their bike commuters, how else could that be used to quantify ridership and help build the program, or make the case for bike incentives or more investments into the bike program? And just to piggyback on that question, I'm really curious to hear both Sarah and John Mark talk about the data that they've received from ZAP and sort of how that's been useful in general, but especially if thinking about a school or a company that didn't have the funding for incentives.
Well, obviously that's a hard one, because the key for us was the incentive. But, on the operations side, when we look at projects, in totality, and, the university as an area, it does help us plan for university facilities better. We have traffic counters, we know where those are, but, where's the other active mobility elements that we need to consider when we're looking at, where's the next dollar going to be spent on? There's obviously the the satisfaction element as well among our cyclists, other active mobility people, because the motivation for cyclists normally, a lot of it is personal satisfaction. You're not saving the planet when you're late for work. You're biking because you like biking, and you like that sense of achievement. Yeah, it's difficult to quantify it, admittedly, if you're going to take the incentive away.
I guess I can speak to this a little bit, just because I think that in OSU's program, the incentives are less central to the program, actually. So you have to have the upfront money to invest in the equipment. And then you do have to have sort of ongoing staff support, because in order to keep people signed up for the program in an environment like a university, at least for us, but I think it's true for most employers too, where you have ongoing turnover in your population, you have to be out there like continuing to find your riders and get tags on their bikes. And we do that, you know, by partnering with our campus bike shop and also with a local bike cooperative. But aside from that, really the value that we've seen in the ZAP program has been like the motivation that riders have comes less from the possibility that like maybe 1 or 2 times a year they're going to win a water bottle or a set of lights from us. I think they get a kick out of that, but what really drives them is the ways in which we've used the program to provide social motivations. And what I mean by that is like on the homepage of our site, when you first go to log in, you see a counter. And I know they have this University of Minnesota also, but you see how many total zaps have been collected since the program started. We're up to over 150,000, which feels good for us for where we're at in our program. And then when you log in, there are leaderboards and you see where you rank amongst other riders. You see how your department ranks amongst other departments. And for people who are competitive minded and interested in the data, we have some people that are logging in regularly to check their stats and see how they compare to others. We have a few key individuals, we're up to 4 now, who've passed the 1,000 zaps threshold, which is the point at which we recognize them with the Golden Gear Award for their ridership levels. And so people are, they find their own intrinsic motivations, and they're motivated by seeing what other people are doing on campus. And that's more powerful than any financial incentive that I could give them. That being said, we are also looking into ways that we can take what we've learned from ZAP and actually wrap it into a larger potential incentive program that's multimodal in scope at the university. So we are approaching releasing an RFP for a new commute platform that would house both a place to oversee multimodal and sustainable transportation incentives, and also a place where people are paying for parking. So they're seeing their costs and benefits coming in and out of one wallet, and it's all in one place. And we think what we've learned in ZAP can help us. But that being said, we don't want ZAP to go away, because we've seen the power of the bike community and how much they motivate each other. And we think that if we turn that, what we've done with ZAP, into a purely multimodal challenge where people who ride the bus are competing against people who ride their bikes, that we're going to lose something in the mix.
I would just add that we were interested in this too, and we did a study on virtual rewards, and we had it was a PhD student, and he did his field work for his dissertation on the effect of virtual rewards on riding frequency. So we compared people who are actually earning real rewards through the health benefit program. And then the virtual rewards are separated into 2 groups. One of the groups could post, there was an automatic post to their social media accounts about their achievements. And then the other one just got like they would get virtual badges. And it did show, especially with the social media aspect of it, if the badges that you earned were posted to your Facebook account, or your Instagram account, or tweeted, that group of people, their ridership did increase more than the other group. So that was interesting to us.
You're still muted, Lou.
Muted, Lou.
Oh, never.
I get confused as to what buttons muted and unmuted. Sorry about that. But I love that. I love that incentive to reward the person or people who have ridden 1,000 trips. That's great. It reminds me of, hitting 3,000 base hits. That's a huge milestone. That's wonderful. One of the other questions we had come in was related to eco counters. Why ZAP instead of an eco counter, bike counter? What are the advantages of using ZAP over something more basic?
There's no data connected to eco counters. except a raw number of people of bikes, but there's no, you don't have any idea of, nothing against EcoCounter, it's great, but the additional data that you can get from ZAP, I think, makes it different in that way and makes it potentially more useful.
Yeah, I think they're different. The eco counters, you can get a quantitative sense of how many people are riding past a point, which can be really valuable. There's lots of different ways to collect that data, but the eco counters are nice in that they make that data, publicly visible to people as they're riding by. And so you do sort of get that feedback for the rider where they're like seeing how they're part of something bigger. But what you lose, I think Steve is alluding to, is that you're not tracking an individual's behavior in a way that allows you to connect with that individual and potentially provide further incentives to them.
And we tried putting tube counters out at ZAP sites. Because if we can figure out what this ratio is of actual to ZAP users, and we just couldn't, it wasn't significant enough, and it was just kind of it varied too much by location. We couldn't get something that we could apply across the whole system, which is unfortunate. I think if you did it for long enough, maybe you could come up with something, but we just did it for like one summer, and it was kind of all over the place.
I think one function also to highlight, and we just did this today because, admittedly we were late issuing our fall newsletter because there is the platform. It's not just, the tag. There is the platform where we do our communication through the ZAP program to our participants. So we have our ZAP newsletter that we issued today. And, for us, it's another channel to promote not just biking news, like Sarah said, because, really, as far as sustainable transportation is concerned, there's other messages to be said out there, so we could promote anything from transit to walking, anything related to active mobility. So we're using the channel to, the platform for Dero ZAP to communicate and issue our newsletters. So we have new programs, like we're piloting a new bike parking program, and you issue the newsletter, we get a response straight away from someone who's interested and say, okay, thanks for bringing this. So other than just the function of counting and rewarding, there is that additional communication channel that the platform gives you.
Thanks. We have time for probably a few more questions here before we end today's talk, but one that just came on is related to data and how you're using the data. How do you use the data to build bike programs, or just for things in general? If you could share any insight on that.
So I think we mentioned, we alluded to that earlier with regards to, we've been talking about the incentive program, but what comes to mind clearly for us now is just the prioritizing corridor improvements that we have in different parts of the campus. As we try to develop more tribal demand management strategies, that information that it gives us about, rider behavior and frequency of use would be something that we could incorporate.
Sarah, you have anything to add?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of ways in which we could use the data smarter, better, more often. There's a lot of different ways to analyze it, and when we have the resources available, when we find a grad student who approaches us who's excited about doing research, we always take them up on those opportunities. And so our data has been used in various ways by different students depending on their interests. Most recently, we've had some grad students who wrote a TRB paper about how the communications related to ZAP during our team challenges in May have affected rider frequency and rider behavior. And so we're really excited to see that paper come out.
And we did some weather-related studies. What kind of weather affected ridership, and the surprising thing for me was the biggest determinant during not wintertime was wind speed had more of an effect than rain. And I still am puzzled by that. But we also did something on women's participation during the winter here drops more than it does for men. And I had an idea, well, maybe it's because of diminished daylight hours and personal safety issues. So we did a study. About that, and we took into account snowfall, road conditions, temperature, daylight hours, and to see if we could sort out, if we could tease out anything. And we actually couldn't. The daylight hours weren't a determining factor. It was more, the bigger factor was road conditions, and we were able to determine that. So there's all sorts of interesting things that you could do. You're just kind of limited by your imagination, really.
Yeah, it really sounds like it's a certain amount of data that can be useful, but it's not intrusive. There's not too much of it, so it seems like a nice balance. And fortunately for campuses with graduate students, it seems like there's no limit to the research that one could do with the numbers that are there. So there's a lot of fun, a lot of opportunities to engage with students on campus over it. A lot of people are interested in these kinds of topics. Another question that came in online is, what happens if a staff member or student, when they leave the university and they're done participating in the program, do you get their tags back? How does the departure from the program look?
Well, they just get deactivated. Like when we do our monthly reports, we can clean out the data. If there was someone who was registered previously and we check with our well-being if they're still getting points, they say that's an error, and then we know that that person has been out of the university community. So, if they don't do it actively, right, if they don't inform us, but the monthly reports will tell you which ones are active and which ones are inactive.
What about those tags? What happens with those tags? I mean, could you explain the tagging system on the spokes, Steve, or anyone really?
The tags are kind of one use. They're designed in such a way that you can't just take the tag off your spokes and put it on the dashboard of your car and drive past a reader and have it count. When you pry them apart, there's a little antenna thing in there, and there's no power to these things. They're not powered. But when you pry it apart, it breaks that, so they no longer function.
I will add that no one's required to turn in a tag or do anything with their tag when they leave, at least at OSU. And so we know there's a lot of tagged bikes out there that have been sold, or wheels that have been transferred or stolen or whatnot. And so it's entirely possible that tags might continue to get scanned, and they're no longer being ridden by the original rider. So there's, like John Mark said, there's some cleanup you can do to try and eliminate people who are no longer registered or affiliated with the university. But at the end of the day, I think we just allow for a little bit of that noise and know that it's all in the service of supporting our active riders.
We recovered a fair number of stolen bikes too. The police would recover a bike, they'd see a zap tag on it, and they'd call us and say, "Hey, contact this person, tell them we have your bike." And so that was pretty nice. And the TMOs in the Twin Cities used to have like 10 zap readers around town, or 10 or 20 zap readers around town, and we would just switch people. If they left the university but were staying in the Twin Cities, we would just move them, transfer them into the other program. They no longer operate those, though, so that's not a possibility
Okay, that's boy, I feel like we could keep going, but unfortunately, we've come to an end for this panel discussion about ZAP and ways to use it on campus. Really appreciate everyone coming, and our panelists. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, and Emilia for helping to essentially co-present and present this to the people that are joining us today. So thanks to the League, of course, and Sarah and Jean-Marc, thank you for sharing all the success stories that you guys have had and some of the challenges you've had with your program. And Steve Sanders, sort of a godfather of ZAP of sorts. Thanks for joining us and sharing your insights. And Sarah Howard behind the scenes, thanks for moderating. And to you all, if you have any follow-up questions, please send them, and you can just reply to your to the communications you've got about this event, and Sarah will be sure to get it to the right panelist or the group of panelists to get back to you about it. Also, this session's been recorded, so you can follow up as well if you want to suggest anyone else listen to it and could be helpful to them. This conversation can keep going, as long as you have some questions. I know we as a panelist and presenter, we had many questions we weren't even able to share because we had enough online participation. So thank you so much. And it seems to me like the conversation should keep going. So don't hesitate to share your questions with us. And thanks again, and have a wonderful holiday season, everybody.
And thanks to you, Lou, for moderating. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Dero, for hosting.